This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. We believe that it is about people and it is about actions. We talk with leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are, with what they have. The question is, what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader that we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I am your host. Thank you for being with us today. I hope you folks had a chance to listen to our episode last week with David Snively. It's always a pleasure for me to talk to really smart people, because that's something I'm not, is a really smart people. But today, our guest is also smart, but I find him really intriguing. So let me tell you about him. He is currently serving as the director of statewide training with the Tennessee Corrections Institute, aka TCI. He began his career in civilian law enforcement with the Dickson County Sheriff's Office, serving in a variety of assignments during his 10 years of tenure with the agency. He joined TCI in 2020 as a detention facility specialist and was appointed to his current role in 2022. But that's not all. He has been a military police officer in the United States Army Reserve since his enlistment in 2010. He has held several positions and is deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. He currently holds the rank of Sergeant First Class, which is an E7 for you folks who are not of the Army persuasion. But he's promotable and should be promoted pretty soon. And he serves currently as the interim command sergeant major for the 2nd of the 100th Military Police Battalion. He recently finished the United States Army Military Police School instructor, where he earned the prestigious title of Master Army Instructor. And folks, that's important because that is an honor that has been held by less than 100 instructors ever since the program was instituted. He also is a big believer in lifelong learning. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice and a Master of Science degree in criminal justice with a focus on criminology. He is a certified instructor in use of force, instructional design, curriculum design, facilitation, victim advocacy, suicide prevention and intervention, resiliency, and holistic fitness, and most importantly, leadership, all of which he still regularly instructs. His primary passion, folks, is this, and this is why he's on the podcast. His primary passion is advancing leadership initiatives across the state and the country. He is impassioned by sharing his knowledge and experience with others. And that's also, little teaser here, we're going to be talking about that today in the episode. He considers himself a lifelong student and enjoys learning what knowledge and experience others share with him, which is one of our founding principles. David Elola lives in Tennessee with his wife and 5 children. So folks, just that right there alone leads me to believe he doesn't have a lot of spare time. But David, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
We've been going back and forth and trying to get a hold of each other. Our mutual friend Ronnie says, well, he's probably doing Army stuff. Whenever David doesn't immediately respond, hey, he's probably doing Army stuff. It's kind of important. He's kind of an important guy doing top secret stuff. I appreciate you taking time from the top secret stuff. I think we're going to have a good time today.
I hope so. Our mutual friend, he likes to embellish a little bit, but that's all right.
He's a storyteller. You know what I'm saying? He's a master storyteller, but he's a great guy.
I love him. I love him to death.
All of us love him. We also recognize that everybody has shortcomings. So let's talk about this thing, because when you and I talked in preparation for the episode, one of the things that really hit home to me, and I believe I wrote down the words here, how you got started on this leadership journey was your initial enlistment in the Army Reserves. And what you said, hey, I joined a little bit later than many people in the military typically do. And you said, and this is the word you used, you said you were looking for stability. What did you mean by looking for stability?
I joined up at 22, and I had been married for about a year. Me and my wife had a young child. I was doing retail management and, kind of working the retail scene. I was looking for that opportunity to kind of really add some stability to our life and kind of a sense of purpose, right? Something more than that, which I was doing, and also provide, great benefits, access to resources for my children, child at that time, and, children later down the road. But when I enlisted, it was a reality check, right? The stability, the structure, the rigidity. It was everything I was looking for at that time, because I was kind of wayward. I'm not going to lie to you. I was kind of weaving in and out of life, going in very, very different directions. Walked in the recruiter's office, and the recruiter was like, "Hey, what do you want to do?" Right? I'm like, what do you got going on? The guy goes, "Hey, I got 3 jobs available right now. If you want a bonus, this is something you can look at." It's like, okay, well, a little bit extra money never hurts. Like, what do you got? He goes, "Well, you can be an Army plumber." And I was all like, "That's not exactly what I thought." And he goes, "Oh, well, about an Apache mechanic." And I was like, well, once again, not kind of what I'm looking for. He goes, "Well, you can be military police." And, mind you, at this time, I was more inclined to try to stay away from law enforcement than try to be a part of law enforcement. And so he goes, MP's not that bad. And I said, well, me being young, I was all like, which of these 3 jobs I'd most likely hit of blowing stuff up? He goes, "Oh, you want to be an MP then?" And I was all like, well, how do you blow stuff up writing tickets? He goes, "Oh, that's not all you do. Like, you'll see. You're going to have the time of your life. Just wait." And, literally 11 days later, I shipped off to basic training. Yeah, so ended up at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, 21 weeks lost in the woods. And it was one site unit training. So we hit reception, and then we got picked up by our company. Charlie 795 was my company. We got picked up by them. We had the same drill sergeants from start to finish. So we spent, 21 weeks with the same guys and gals. And that was really cool, because you got to learn a lot from them. And you got to see the transition where it was like, hey, we're going to, beat your face into the ground, and you're going to learn your lessons, and you're going to, get tore down and built back up. Me being older, I was there with a lot of 17 and 18-year-old kids coming fresh out of high school. They were, and I was like, okay, I see what they're doing here. And this is just a game, right? As the quote unquote, the game transitioned into later, these drill sergeants that were trying to basically turn you into a soldier in the beginning started becoming more like a mentor. And that's where I really, really first had my serious contact with leadership, like what leadership is supposed to look like, in my opinion. You start off trying to build someone. I mean, obviously, you don't want to do it as forcibly as a drill sergeant does all the time, right? Every situation requires a certain different an approach. But in this case, then you saw that shift where they got you to that mark, and then they became more like a professional mentor, where they were, investing one-on-one time, trying to guide you, trying to mold you, not only into a soldier, but into a subordinate leader, right? Where they're investing into you to carry the torch, for lack of better terms. And they told you that. They were very, very frank. They were like, hey, look, you got what it takes to be a great soldier, and like one day, be a leader. And they told the other ones, like, hey, you have no business being here, like me to send you home.
But David, would you agree with me, though, that it's an important distinction between hazing and what your drill sergeants were doing? It wasn't done without purpose. It wasn't done for entertainment. It was for establishing the baseline for what was expected of you as far as actions and appearance and everything that somebody needs coming into a new organization. But it wasn't a hazing. They weren't just doing it because they could.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. It was never a situation where it felt like it was hazing. Honestly, I've been in the Army, like you said, 14 years. I have never seen an instance where I believe that hazing occurred. That basic training mentality with the intention, like you said, one of the core tenets of Army leadership is an Army leader provides purpose, motivation, and direction. There was a purpose to motivate you and give you direction in all of their actions. So, the corrective action, training, quote unquote, getting smoked, as they used to call it.
Yeah.
Even that, like when we were out in the tire pit doing push-ups, doing sit-ups, up, downs, goes, whatever we were doing, they were talking to us the entire time. Like, look, you're doing this corrective action, because of X, Y, and Z. It was never a situation where it was like, hey, we're doing corrective action because, we can just do that. Like I've never encountered that in the military. And also I've been very, very fortunate that I've never encountered it anywhere else where someone just utilized power over another person for the sake of having power.
I love how you use the terminology mentoring, because the leader has to respond to the individual as well. And that transition from the drill sergeant into more of a mentor was because you guys were ready for that at that point. In too many cases, I see leaders that they've got one tool and they continue to use it even when it's not appropriate.
No, absolutely. And that's something I can relate to. I've seen that 1,000 times over, where leaders in particular, that they don't adequately prepare. They don't have a toolbox full of tools, because you think about leadership, like almost like being a mechanic, right? So we're going under the hood, we're going to fix this car, and you reach your tool belt and all you got is a hammer. Well, that's not going to do you any good under the hood of that car, because you start beating something, you're going to start breaking something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one of the things that you really got to look at, especially with mentorship, right? Is that approach. The approach that I got introduced to by those drill sergeants, it's been an approach I've used my entire career, civilian side and military side. You got to find that right tool, that right way to address, and that right way to deal with that individual person, versus the one size fits all, hammer from the tool belt mentality.
Yeah, back in the 70s, and you're a young man, this doesn't apply to you, but back in the 70s, it didn't matter what injury you got, your mom was bringing out the mercurochrome, and it was this orange stuff that when you put it on you, it felt like the fire was eating through your skin, but that was the answer to everything, but it wasn't really the answer to everything. And when we talked, I loved how you said this. You described your experience as the light switch going on, that you like the structure, you like the stability of the military, but let's be honest with each other, because based upon your own story, the light switch may have been turned on, but it was a dimmer switch. It wasn't at full bright, because there was a time during one of your deployments, you told me about a squad leader had a very frank discussion with you. Why don't you explain what happened with that one?
Yeah, it definitely was a dimmer switch. There wasn't a doubt about that. The basic training part was like, hey, suddenly the lights came on and, oh, wow, I'm really good at being a military police officer. Maybe I should pursue law enforcement. After basic training, I did. But like you said, that the lights really came on when that dimmer switch got thrown all the way up and the lights went bright. It was 2013. I had a excellent squad leader. Like this guy, old school, salt of the earth, combat jumped into Panama with the Rangers, was in Iraq and Afghanistan like 6 times. And he was just a really, really solid dude. Civilian side, he was a firefighter. So he had this very like no BS, no slack personality. Just like he just said it how it was. He's talking to me and he's all like, Elola, what are you doing? And I was just like, no, what do you mean, Sergeant? What am I doing? Doing my job. And he goes, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you stepping up? Why aren't you being a leader? Right? I'm like, he's just like, yeah, exactly. You don't have an answer for me. He goes, you have the potential, you have the abilities, you have the capabilities, you can do this. Like, you get it. You're just not applying yourself. And I was like, okay. He just kind of looked at me and goes, look, stupid, you get it. All right. Like, I can't break this down any more Barney style for you than this. Like, you get it. You understand it. Start doing it. He goes, I'm going to give you some more responsibility. Figure it out. If you need help, come talk to me. If you need mentoring, you need guidance, you need direction, come talk to me. But he said, otherwise, he said, figure it out, because you know your job and you know how to lead other people. He's all like, you have that, that natural born leadership ability, that charisma to you, and you can do this. You're just choosing not to. And that's a disservice to not only you, but to the Army. And he goes, also a disservice to your family, disservice to what you do in civilian world and law enforcement. He's all like, you're just not tapping into your potential. You're with me for the next 6 months, because we were about 3 months in the deployment at this time. He goes, you're with me in the next 6 months. And he goes, I'm gonna make your life hell if you don't step up. And, and that was that moment, right? He came back to me and he goes, hey, I'm making you a team leader now. You got 3 soldiers you're responsible for. Figure it out. I was like, oh, okay. Now he's not only giving me responsibility, like he's giving me real responsibility. He goes, oh, by the way, we're going to make you a corporal. He goes, you're a specialist, but we're going to make you a corporal. He goes, you're kind of like an NCO, you're without the pay. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, that sounds fantastic. Not. But, he invested in me. He gave me that authority through that lateral promotion to corporal that helped me be able to effectively do my job, quote unquote. After that, it was very different. Like, I started going to leadership meetings and I started seeing the big picture, military, like what we were doing, why we were doing it, all of our objectives, our missions, like, hey, this is the reason why we're doing this now. Like the things that you were curious about as a soldier when you hear about it, but when you're in that leadership meeting, then everything starts becoming more crystal clear and, your input's expected. That was probably like one of the coolest things was at that time I was 20, 23, 24, somewhere. I just turned 24 probably. I was 24 years old and I'm providing input, a first sergeant or a company commander or a platoon leader while we're planning an operation because I'm there at the table. It was a very, very humbling experience as well. But that's kind of where the lights went on. And after I came home, it was, Katie barred the door. I started sprinting, not only in the military, but I started sprinting in my civilian career as well and had a lot of opportunity to, honestly be able to shine. And it wasn't like I had more opportunity than other people. That wasn't the case at all. Cause you would see things like, hey, anyone want to volunteer to go to this class? Right. And everyone's like looking around and I'm like, why not? Let's do it.
It's interesting to me though, because this has been 2 times in your life where you recognize that you needed something more. You needed something more and more is expected of you. The first time was when you got married and you had a kid and you recognized that what you were doing wasn't going to cut it long term. And so you joined the military. Well, then all of a sudden, now you're a fire team leader. Man, you know what? What I'm doing is not enough. Because it's not just me anymore. I'm responsible for other people. I love people that step up and volunteer for things, even if they don't know anything about it, because that's the only way of learning where our passion is, where our strengths lie, what our limitations are. Because would you agree with me that it's incredibly important for a leader to have a clear understanding of their personal limitations because it has impact on their ability to lead?
Oh, 100%, Michael, 100%. And you have to know where that barrier is. You have to know where that threshold is because it bleeds over into every facet of life. Like just because you're a fantastic leader and you're leading beyond your threshold, other areas will begin to be affected. Whether it's, in your home or it's in your personal life with your friends or whether it's, fringe tasks, you have to know how far you can go and how far you're able to take it, but you also have to trust others. So something that I figured out and I had to learn with trusting others in this case was sometimes someone's going to tell you you're ready for something and you don't think you are. It's a very humbling experience when I came back from overseas. I made E5 like 4 months later, and like 5 months after making E5, I get approached by the first sergeant. Go say, I'm going to make you a squad leader. And me and the CSM have been talking, the command sergeant major. We've been talking. We want you to put in your packet the secondary zone promotion staff sergeant. So I was like, man, I've been an E5 for like 4 or 5 months at this time when this conversation.
Yeah, long enough to have a cup of coffee, right?
Long enough to have a cup of coffee, exactly. And I had about a year as a team leader, but they were like, hey, no, you're ready to be a squad leader. So put my packet in. And bam, next thing I know is they moved me over as a squad leader as E5 as a sergeant. Then I pick up staff sergeant. I promoted from E5 to E6 in 11 months. Like my first OER evaluation report was a change of rater. Like I never had a full year as an E5. And I found that situation again. I didn't get the promotion so much later, but I got approached after being a squad leader for 2 years and was like, hey, you're ready to be a platoon sergeant. Like we want you to take over first platoon. And, that was a very humbling experience also, because in both cases, like, honestly, I didn't feel like I was ready for that next step. Like I was like, man, I just got on this first step here. Like I got my second foot on the stair and you're telling me to take the next step already. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it is very important to know where your limitations are and tell people that, but it's also very important to trust leaders around you, especially leaders who are invested in you. They want to see you succeed, because sometimes when you doubt what you're ready for, that leader is going to reinforce and say, no, you're ready for that next step. You need to take it and you need to take that leap of faith. That's something in the military and in civilian side I've never been afraid of doing. if there's like one real big virtue that I can say, it's courage. Like me and my wife, we have crazy courage. We look at situations and we're like, hey, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like we're going to stumble backwards a little bit. Like, let's go forward. And I've done that my entire life, and I pay dividends to that because I honestly, I wouldn't be where I'm at in life right now. I got appointed as the director of statewide training at 33. I took a pay cut coming to work for TCI in the beginning. I took a almost $15,000 pay cut when I left the sheriff's office to work for TCI. And this is another example of that courageous step. Like, hey, other people say you're ready to do this. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, make the jump.
It's so important, I think, from a leadership perspective for those that are listening, to let those that you work with, tell them what you see in them. Because you had your squad leader that saw in you that you had the potential if you were willing to put in the work. And then later on, you had people higher up that saw that potential if you were willing to take that leap of faith. This impacted you later on in life because as you move up the chain of command, you're not necessarily directly leading the frontline personnel. You're leading the leaders of the frontline personnel. When you become the platoon sergeant, your focus becomes your squad leaders because they carry out for you the leadership farther down the chain. It doesn't mean you don't have contact with those people, but your responsibility, you are now responsible for the leaders. Now it becomes your job to recognize the potential in them. At least what our conversation, to me, that's where it kind of really started clicking with you, the importance of training people properly so that they can be that leader that you need them to be and their people need them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you become a platoon sergeant, that's where you step into organizational level leadership. And as an organizational level leader, we're training 2 steps down. Well, actually 3 steps if you include the line level soldier, where our focus has shifted now to training 2 levels of subordinate leaders plus advancing future leaders, which are our line level soldiers. That squad leader looks for you for direct mentorship, and then indirect mentorship through that squad leader is your team leaders. So what that allowed me to realize was as an organizational leadership, the importance of instilling really strong training, really strong doctrinal based decision making, and really preparing them for the hard stuff. Because, for all sakes and purposes, like, even when I was a team leader, yeah, I was deployed. Okay. Even as a squad leader, like, it was great. But the most hardships that I ever had, was as a platoon sergeant. I lost 2 soldiers that fell underneath me. That was very, very hard. And when your responsibility is, the troop welfare, troop training, they call it beans, bullets, beds, and training, right? So my responsibility is to make sure they get fed, they have somewhere to sleep, they're trained, and that they're in good spirits. And then acting as an extension of the first sergeant. But when, you lose a soldier, for example, then, you start looking internally at yourself. So there's some of the lessons that I was able to teach my subordinate leaders, and even not only in a line organization when I was a line leader, but when I went back to, TRADOC, where I'm finishing up my time now in training doctrine and command, I was able to instill some of those lessons into the students that we were preparing to advance to the next grade. And that's where I really started having, an impact, because I'm training 16 students at a time. These 16 students are from all across the United States, from all 3 components, whether they're active, guard, or reserve. They were going back and they were taking my lessons with them. And those lessons that I was taking with them, I want to say that they were impactful and they worked. I still have several students from like 5 years ago that still reach out to me for mentorship. So I know it resonated in some of them. And that's the biggest thing is, like, even if it's 16 students, like, if I change the life of one, change the leadership perspective of one, that's a job well done, because I know those lessons are going to move on.
Well, it's important to point out here, though, that in the military model, one of the things that a platoon sergeant often gets to do is not only lead down, but lead up, because you often get a brand new second lieutenant who's assigned as a platoon leader. When you start talking about the impact you get to have impact down the chain of command and up the chain of command, because eventually those second lieutenants become first lieutenants. And then they become captains. Now they're company commanders, and they are operating off of things that you do. That's one of the things that I think is so important in the leadership realm is the recognition that even if you're the boss, the official boss, you may not be the best person to lead at that point. You may not have all the knowledge and information that's needed. Be willing to lean on others who are willing to help you lead.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. And I've been very blessed in the second lieutenants I've had. I've had the distinct privilege of getting to mold and mentor and train 4 second lieutenants. I can successfully say that all of them are still in the Army, and at this point, they're captains and majors now. But I would be remiss to say that, right, wrong, or indifferent, the first conversation I had with a second lieutenant when they came in is that, hey, I'm your platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Elola, and this is going to go one of 2 ways, sir. Number 1 is you're going to have a great OER, their evaluation report, or number 2, you're going to have a bad one. They kind of look at me and like, well, but what do you mean? I'm like, well, if you do everything I say, respectfully, do everything I say, we're going to take you places because, sir, you just got here from college, or you just got here from BOLIC, Basic Officer Leaders Course. So like, I really need you to be here and listen to me, sir. Like, I'm going to set you up for success. If you listen to me and you come out and you do the things that I'm asking you to do, because, I can't tell an officer what to do, but I can advise them, like say, hey, sir, like you really need to come out here and train with your soldiers. You really need to come out here and be seen. You really need to do these things. You can set them up for success by leading up in that way. And also what that does is that builds a remarkable relationship with your leadership, where it's a relationship that is rooted in mutual trust and respect. Like that lieutenant knows, hey, if I do X, Y, and Z, Sergeant Elola is going to take care of me. Or Sergeant Elola comes to me and says, hey, sir, we really need to look at this. This is a problem. We need to fix this. Then they know that, hey, this is a problem because he's not going to bring this kind of BS. So it is a very influential position. And then ultimately metal hits the meat. That lieutenant's in charge. So it's
absolutely,
you got to lead down.
I like looking at NASCAR racing teams because what a lieutenant really is the driver. They get to enjoy the fruits of the labor of the pit crew and the mechanics who have built the car and have got the car ready to run, because that's what a platoon sergeant does. They get the platoon ready to run. They're the ones that handle the training and all that type of things. But then the platoon sergeant also turns kind of in the spotter, because the spotter can see things that the driver can't see. That driver has to trust the spotter that, hey, you got somebody coming up on your left side, but you need to stay down. And it's a mutual trust, a mutual respect for the betterment of the team and the individuals on the team. If one of those people don't have those best interests in mind, it can really throw a wrench into things.
No, you're absolutely correct. It all boils down to realizing that you're intertwined. You have to take care of each other on multiple levels. And, realistically, like I said, I was very blessed. All the lieutenants that I got to work with and work under, they all became friends eventually, right? We had that. Mm-hmm. I use that term very, very loosely because though I believe, hey, it's great to, quote unquote, befriend your boss, you also have to maintain that level of professional decorum because they are your boss. But I was able to not only develop that relationship professionally, but develop that relationship personally, where they genuinely felt like I had their best interest at heart. And I did. And they had mine. And then they had our soldiers. And so, like I said, I've just been very blessed. I've seen the horror stories. I've heard the horror stories from my battle buddies. But in this instance, when it came to leading up in that situation, I was very, very fortunate.
Let's shift gears for just a little bit, because you got really heavily involved in the instructor training side of things. What is this master instructor thing all about? Explain that to me.
So in 2019, I left a line unit and I went to a training unit under TRADOC. Started off as a leadership instructor for the military police corps. Like, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a leadership instructor. When I came in, there's a program called the Faculty Development and Recognition Program in the Army. Every instructor in the Army is eligible to enroll in it. Most of the instructors, they do everything they need to do to become a badged basic Army instructor. You get your basic Army instructor, you have basic recognition. Then there's a senior instructor badge, and then there's the master instructor badge. Well, at the time, I was like, I mean, what does it take to be a master instructor? Basically, at the time, my director of instruction, he handed me a piece of paper, the sergeant major did, and he goes, "This is what you need to do, Sergeant Elola, to be a master instructor." And I'm looking at this list, and I'm like, holy smokes. I have to be an instructor for almost 5 years. That in itself is a commitment. I have to teach so many hours. I have to rewrite, redesign, and create an entire lesson, and I have to turn it in for evaluation. I have to perform in front of my peers so many evaluations at a high level. So in the newest TRADOC form for it is basically you have to consistently score a 95 out of 100 on your evaluations for 2 years to be able to even be considered for the master instructor badge. Basically, you can never have a bad day teaching. You can never have a bad day teaching. And you can hope that your evaluator is not having a bad day also and doesn't misinterpret something you're saying. Through all that process, you go through the basic badge, senior badge, you go through all these evaluations, all these self-development observations, all of these instructional self-development classes where they teach you how to rewrite lessons, design curriculum, instructor observation courses where they teach you how to evaluate other instructors. You have to actually deliver a set number of evaluations. Then into the master instructor realm, you go before a board. You go before a master instructor selection board, and they rate you based off your doctrinal and academic knowledge and instructional capabilities to determine, basically whether or not you deserve to be a master instructor. I was very, very fortunate and very, very blessed that when my opportunity came, time-wise, I was awarded master instructor recognition, and I got to, join that rank of less than 100 in the Army.
It's interesting to me that not only were you in the training and instruction side of things, but it was specifically for leadership instruction. And the reason why I find that so interesting is that there are so many people in a leadership position who are unwilling to teach the next generation, because too many of them worry that, hey, David, if you train Michael and Michael becomes proficient in your job, and maybe Michael becomes better at your job than you are, then you may be out of a job. You're literally training your replacement, and many people are uncomfortable doing that. But would you agree with me that that is the ultimate responsibility of a leader?
I definitely would agree with you. It's succession planning 101. I call it the car wreck theory. I tell this to my students, whether it's in the civilian world or students in the military world. I'm like, put everyone in a car where we're driving down the road and a car accident happens and we lose you, and you. Like, who can do your job? Who's ready to step up? And you get that deer in the headlights look like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, seriously, like you're so concerned with quote unquote having your job secure. You're so concerned with not teaching others how to do your job appropriately that you're actually creating a hindrance to the organization. Because in some areas, in some worlds, it's not as dangerous as others, but like in law enforcement and the military, if you don't properly invest in your subordinate leaders, that could be really, really, really bad. And you had a really great example of that yesterday, Michael, where you were talking about We Were Soldiers. And, actually after you and me talked on the phone, I actually went and watched the movie because you were like, I was like, oh yeah, now I got to watch it. It's in my head. But that's exactly the case, right? Like, the colonel walks up, lieutenant colonel hits him and goes, you're dead. What's your decision? You waited too long. You're dead. What's your decision? Well, get off the chopper. Well, then get off the chopper. That's exactly the kind of situations that you have to prepare for. And, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow, whether in the morbid sense of, okay, you may pass away, but or in the unmorbid sense, like, hey, my boss in my current job as the, director of statewide training for TCI, I'm executive service. Like, he walks in and says, hey, David, we're going to go a different direction. We don't need you anymore. Okay, I'm gone. Who's ready to step up? Like, did I do my job properly and prepare the next person to step up to take my role? It's a huge responsibility of a leader to take the time and invest back and teach and prepare them because you should be looking at your next step, right?
But there's also something selfish in it, though. I mean, it's not just about the organization, although it certainly does them. But, we talk about in the wellness and resiliency world, the importance of being able to unplug sometimes and have true family time or have true mic time. If I don't trust the people that work for me to make the proper decisions on my behalf, then I never truly get to unplug. I think that if we train our replacements properly, then we become healthier as an individual. And if I'm healthier as an individual, I'm a better husband. I'm a better dad. I'm better on the business side of things. Everything about it gets better if I'm a better person. So it's not just a benefit to the agency. It's also a benefit to us, isn't it?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, that's something that I learned personally. Like, that was a hard lesson learned, right? Hitting that wall, hitting that burnout, where you're scrambling and you don't have anyone to delegate to and you don't trust anyone and you're taking it all on yourself and you're thinking that train of thought you were talking about, right? Where it's like, oh, well, I don't have anyone I can trust, which is really hard, which is really hard as a leader. And the question I ask people now when you find yourself in that case is, and this is a question that, I wish I would have asked myself 15 years ago is like, well, why do they work for you? Like, if you don't trust them and they're not ready, why do they work for you? Because they're not prepared. And in turn, what it's doing is, since you don't trust them to take on more, you're doing more. You're causing problems at home. You're causing problems not being a dad, not being as present. You're really just taking problem after problem after problem and compacting them.
As we're wrapping things up, one of the things I appreciate about people is when they practice what they preach. Because in your role as the director of training for TCI, you are intentionally training people to be leaders at all levels in their organizations. Too often we think very narrowly focused on us and our organization. But in the corrections world, if there's a failure of leadership in one agency, it can have a negative impact on the agency next door. It can have a negative impact on the entire profession. So one of the things that you've championed is leadership training at all levels. It has the potential, in my opinion, to be industry changing if we do it properly as a profession.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. Let's kind of speak to that a little bit. Tennessee Corrections Institute, we have two parts to our organization, right? But we have three parts. So we have administration, which they handle the day-to-day operations of the business side. And they're kind of the unsung heroes of our agency. And I really appreciate everything that our administrative support staff and our director of administration does. And then we have our operations arm. This is where a lot of people become kind of familiar with some of the stuff that we do, where they conduct the compliance and quality assurance audits of the 125 correctional facilities across our state, where they're checking on standards of care, making sure the agencies are using a lot of best practices in accordance with our minimum standards, which is ultimately all about reducing their legal liability. So it's about giving back to those agencies. And then probably, the lion's share of what our agency does is training. Responsible for 125 facilities, roughly 8,000 officers across the state. Every piece of training that these officers do across the entire state flows through us. Kind of like post for a state that utilizes a post commission. We're kind of the post for local jail corrections, right? So all their training flows through us. Well, when I took this position in 2022, my executive director, which I can't speak highly enough of him, he really, really invested the time, opportunity, and trust in me. One of the things he said to me the other day about trust was, he goes, David, if you asked me for my firstborn child, I'd give her to you. I'd ask you to be careful. I would really, really make sure you're careful, but I'll give you my firstborn if you ask me. In that moment, I was all like, all right, wow, there's no higher compliment, because, you think about it after he says it and it's all like, would I trust him with my first child? And yes, I would. I would absolutely, because him and his wife, they've demonstrated time and time again that they have the best interest of me and my family at their hearts. So outside of whether it's professional or personal interactions, I kid you not, like, if you ever meet my boss, Will Wall, which I don't have a problem saying his name because he knows that I love him to death and I speak highly of him every opportunity I get. If you ever have an opportunity to meet Will Wall, just ask him the whole true beer story that David because he literally said, "This is what I want to do." And I said, "Will, hold my beer." I handed him my beer literally and said, "This is what I want to do." And I started writing stuff down. And he looked at it and he was all like, "Oh, you're the right guy for the job. I'm going to trust you. Run with it." So we're looking through all these things, we're doing all of these studies, we're looking at where we're at as a state. And I'm sitting here looking at it. I'm like, where's leadership at? Like, what are we doing? Why is it not here? What's the disconnect? I mean, this is something that is so foundational and so important and such a requirement. And, the military doesn't do a lot of things right. Like your prior service, Michael, you understand that. Like the military doesn't do a lot of things right, but they really, really do, in my opinion, do leadership training right. And they try to prepare their leaders for what's coming. And I was like, we're not doing that. And I was like, well, not only are we not doing that, but it's like the entire industry really isn't doing it. Like, yeah, there's some pop-ups here and there on the correction side of the house where, yeah, there's some stuff going on. Like NJO, they do some stuff. ACA, AJA, they do some stuff. But, that's really hard to get people into that kind of stuff. And it's really time consuming and requires travel. And it's very expensive. And I was like, we need to build something here in the backyard, something that we can just continue. And, before COVID, TCI was field testing, something they called the Tennessee Corrections Leadership Initiative. Unfortunately, when COVID kind of struck at it getting started, it kind of went to the wayside, not because it was like, well, we don't want to do this. It was just because we as a state got dictated like, hey, you guys are going to be working from home, minimize classroom opportunity. Basically, only thing we could do was statutorily mandated training, right? That's the only time we're allowed to be in person. So all of these extra initiatives kind of went to the wayside. And I was like, okay, well, we're going to rebuild this. And went to a great training class, met some great people, met John Bostaine. Me and John had quite a few conversations. We spent quite a bit of time tossing ideas back and forth. Fast forward a few months, I asked John to come speak at our conference. John comes out, speaks at our conference. And that was this was the beta test, right? This was like, okay, how are people going to respond to John? This is what matters because I really want to partner with these guys, but I got to see how my agencies are going to respond. If I partner with Command Presence, for example, and they're like, oh, well, we didn't really like John and what John's selling, then I'm not going to get the input. I'm not going to get the buy-in. That's the kind of balance. You got to develop a leadership program people want to attend. John comes in, kills the conference like I thought he was going to, and people are like, man, that guy. And I was like, yeah, that guy's great. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, like if I put on a 40-hour class, like would you send your people to do it? And they were like, oh, absolutely. And I was like, all right. All I need to know about 5 or 6 people I talked to about that, people I really trust that are like-minded like me, right? That really invest in the profession, walk away from that, call John and say, hey, John, like, this is what I want to do. He goes, all right, let me get our friend we talked about earlier, let me get Ronnie on the phone. Me, John, and Ronnie sat down and we talked and we kind of mapped out the direction we were going. And we birthed this amazing product that we have now. So we have the 3-tier leadership series going on in Tennessee for corrections, and I've extended the offer across the aisle. Like I don't care if you're corrections, your blue lights, I don't care if patient parole, like it's leadership training. Like come and get it. I'm paying for it out of our budget. I don't want to see a seat empty in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And so we got this amazing line level leadership class, the emerging leader. We have an organizational level leadership class. And we have an executive level leadership class. And what I really like about them is they are intrinsic to each level. And that's something I think the military does good that I'm glad that we've successfully applied to corrections in Tennessee. And I'm just excited and tickled to see where it's going to go. The sky's the limit and people are talking so much about it and people are putting leadership on the radar. So last year at this point in time in the year, we had about 120-ish graduates from leadership courses across the state. This time of the year right now, we have 158. By the end of the year, I think the number is going to probably break somewhere along the lines of 300. So we're super, super thrilled about not only our partnership and the training that's being provided, but we're super thrilled that our agencies that we support and the people that we train are truly buying into this training. Because like I said here, and I can talk about testimonials all day long where people call me and they'll say, hey, David, I just want to let you know, like I attended that leadership training. I was like, well, what did you think? They were like, nothing short of transformational. Like it's changing. Get a phone call the other day from a director of training from one of the largest agencies in the state of Tennessee. And he's kind of like us. Like he likes to know his people, like all of his people. So he calls me and says, hey, David, I just want to give you some feedback and let you know, like this guy who went to the training and didn't intend on staying. He went to the training and only brought one change of clothes. He was all like, I plan on like not staying and leaving. I told my supervisor that. And, you know, he had that light switch moment during the first day. And like, he had to go to Walmart and buy clothes to stay the rest of the week. People are hungry for it. As long as they're hungry, I'm going to feed them. Like I want people to be better leaders. I want people to lead this industry into the next generation, right? Like this whole adage of, well, this is the way we've always done it, or this is the way that we need to do it. Like, no, you need to take a step back and get a real perspective on what we're doing, get a grasp, develop your people, right? Because development is what it's about as a leader. It's about taking time and mentoring them and developing them and preparing them for the next step. And these courses do that.
For our listeners, the model that David has established with TCI, I think is game changing. And with his permission, I'm going to include his contact information in our show notes. And folks, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in corrections, if you're in retail, or if you're in manufacturing. This type of thing right here is a benefit that pays forward for years and years to come. I would encourage you folks to do that. But David, as we wrap up here, I have some takeaways that I'm taking away. And so I just want to run them by you to make sure that I heard things correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also good with you sharing my contact information. Any of the listeners who want to reach out, by all means. If I don't answer the phone, leave me a message and I promise I'll call you back. All
right. Takeaway number 1, try things, try new things, challenge yourself. And if you're in a leadership position and you see potential in others, challenge them to try things, because that's where we learn our limitations, but it also is where we learn our passion and where we can grow.
100%. And, Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Effective leadership, it really isn't possible without trust. And trust really is a two-way street that really comes about by a recognition that the other person has my best interest in heart. And true leaders do have other people's best interest in mind when they're doing things.
100% agree. Mutual trust is paramount in anything in life, period.
And then I think one of the biggest things that we ended with today, and one of the things that impacted me most, the leaders should be asking themselves, who's going to fill your shoes? When you're done, because at some point all of us are done, it doesn't mean you're dead. It may mean you're retired or you've moved on to other opportunities. But in most cases, the organizations we're in are going to go on. So who's going to carry that torch that you talked about? And then once you identify who they are, or they identify themselves to you, then train them up so they can do it properly.
Absolutely. If you're a leader and you are not developing someone to be your replacement and you are not being developed to replace someone, you're wrong. That's the bottom line.
In my opinion, that's one of the surest ways to fail as a leader, is that failure to develop who comes next. But David, I appreciate you being here with us today, taking time. I enjoy conversations like this because they're challenging. And quite honestly, they oftentimes remind me of where I've failed as a leader in my career, where I could have done things better. But I appreciate you talking with us about today. I appreciate the work you're doing with TCI. And also thank you so much for your military service. It is greatly, greatly appreciated.
Hey, Michael, I really appreciate it. I appreciate your service as well. And this has been a thrill.
Very good. Well, folks, we really appreciate you joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. I think there was some really good stuff. Folks, it really helps us out. Be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can also find this episode and all our previous episodes on our website at commandpresence.net/podcast. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. As you go about this next week, I want you to focus on be the leader you wish you had.